Chapter 5. Jessie stood there for only an instant, then made herself continue walking, outwardly calm. But inwardly her stomach was churning, and she felt very cold. Hot breath on her face, stinking of cheap wine and whiskey, dim lights and shadows, noise coming from another room, and laughter in this one. Hands touching her roughly, pulling at her clothes. A heavy weight bearing down on her. A sharp pain, and she tried to cry out, but there was a hand over her mouth now. Other rough hands holding her wrists and ankles. More pain, feeling her flesh tear, the hot wetness of blood. And then the pain was bearable, and she was whimpering so quietly she barely heard it herself, so the hand lifted away from her mouth. She turned her head to escape the foul breath, and through tear-blurred eyes she saw a muscled forearm. She blinked, trying not to think about the panting and heaving, the raw soreness, the acrid smell of sweat, just waiting for it to be over. She concentrated on that forearm, on the muscled strength of it, strength she surely couldn't have fought even if she hadn't drunk too much, and on the marks. Scars? No, there was color. A tattoo. A rose tattoo. Her nightmare, some of it, maybe the most important parts of it. Half under her breath, Jessie heard herself mutter a tattoo. He had a tattoo. She had no idea whether Victor had a tattoo. Today he'd been wearing a crisp white long-sleeve shirt, and hard as she tried, she couldn't remember whether he'd had one 15 years before. He didn't seem the type to consider a tattoo appropriate decoration or expression on a body he worked hard to keep in shape, but she was unwilling to trust either her judgment or her memory about that, not after so many years away. But what if it was him? He was at those parties almost always, and he was always egging me on to try all those different kinds of drinks. I remember that. I think I remember that. But had he done more? He had been the one refilling her glass, even if all she was drinking was beer. She remembered that clearly, flirting with her, touching her casually and yet in a possessive way that thrilled her because he was so much older and all the girls wanted him. And then there was the forbidden fruit aspect of it. Her father would have had a fit if he'd found out, and all the church biddies would have been appalled, and that had added to her excitement. She didn't want to cull through that flash of memory, but forced herself to. 3 of them, at least 3 of them, 4, laughing, pouring whiskey into her mouth as they held her down, and then tearing at her clothes. Jessie could literally see the curtain in her mind drop, cutting off the memories with an abruptness that was almost a shock. She wasn't ready. Not yet. Not ready to remember all of it. Absently reaching up to rub her bare arm where Victor had touched it, frowning, Jessie walked on. Carol Preston was a confident young woman and an experienced hiker. She had hiked all over the country, even in this general area near Barren Hollow, though it was the first time she'd actually gone down into the town. She didn't linger. She'd been raised in a small town and knew how boring Sundays tended to be. Very. So, after enjoying her box lunch and the casual conversation of other hikers, she set off again. She hiked with several others for maybe a mile or so, then bid them goodbye, with more reassurances that she really could take care of herself and would be fine hiking on her own. She struck off alone to the north as planned. She'd gotten off to a late start because of the lunch and conversation, pleasant though it had been, so the afternoon was well advanced, and she'd hiked no more than another couple of miles over the rough terrain before deciding to make camp for the night. She found a likely spot and went through the familiar motions of erecting her small tent and building a safe fire. Not that she needed it for warmth, but a campsite just wasn't a campsite without a fire. And besides, she wanted coffee and her supper, and she wanted both hot. She enjoyed solitude, but nothing happened to mar her experience that night. She enjoyed her coffee and her supper, and after sitting for a time gazing into the flames, she banked the fire for the night and crawled into her tent. It was a warm night, so she didn't zip the tent or her sleeping bag. The quiet night sounds of the forest were familiar to her and lulled her quickly to sleep. Nothing disturbed her rest or her dreams, and she never felt the presence of something that drifted into her campsite sometime after midnight and stood for a long, long time just watching her. June 29. She woke at dawn as she'd expected to, and once again built a fire and cooked herself a meal. She cleaned up after herself and packed up her things, leaving the campsite nearly as pristine as she'd found it, with only a ring of rocks surrounding warm ashes to mark the spot where she had paused to rest. Despite the narrow, twisting trail that was for long stretches often more imaginary than real, and the rocky terrain, she moved at a comfortably brisk pace. The bet with her friends this year included a nice little payoff for the winner, a good dinner that was not pizza every night for a semester. She wanted to win. Carol liked being alone and liked hiking alone. Unlike some of her friends and fellow hikers, she never listened to her MP3 player while hiking. She liked listening to the sounds of nature all around her. Besides, she was no idiot. If you were listening to music, you could hardly hear any warning signs of danger. And there were always warning signs, or sounds. It was probably a good hour or more after she left her campsite behind when it dawned on Carol that what was nagging at her, and had been for a while now, was the lack of sound. The forest was too quiet, and a nameless unease stirred in her. She stopped walking, listening intently, but heard nothing, not even birds. She looked around, turning in a slow circle so she could see all around her. There was nothing out of place, nothing unusual that she could see. And yet, the hair on the back of her neck was standing out, and she felt herself growing gradually chilled, despite the almost oppressive heat of the still summer air. All her instincts were screaming at her that there was something wrong here, something dangerous, yet her senses told her nothing except that it was unnaturally quiet. Trying to think quickly and clearly, Carol went over the map in her head and realized that she was probably as close to the main and undoubtedly more populated trail north of her location as she was to the trail back at Barren Hollow. She could make it within a few hours, she thought, well before dark, if she hurried. So, push on then. Carol remained where she was long enough to shrug out of the backpack and get her pepper spray and gun out. She slipped into the straps of her backpack once again, settling it comfortably to distribute the weight, then did a quick but thorough check of her .22 Smith & Wesson revolver and clipped the holster to her belt. The pepper spray she carried looped around her wrist. The precautions should have made her feel safer. They didn't. The forest was still too quiet, way too quiet, and she felt too chilled for the summer air. But she walked on, more quickly now. So quickly, in fact, that within only a few minutes she had to stop to catch her breath. At first, that was all she heard, her own panting breathing. And then a twig snapped, somewhere close. Emma stopped Jessie in the reception area as her sister was apparently on her way out on Monday morning. Look, should I take it personally that you've spent as little time as you possibly could here at the house so far? I told you I'd mostly be wandering around town. Keeping her voice low so as not to frighten any of the guests, Jessie said, "Besides, it's not you, believe me. Right now, if I look past you into the living room, I can see a Prohibition-era woman standing near the fireplace smoking, using one of those old long cigarette holders, jeweled. Did you know, by the way, that this house was the equivalent of a small-town speakeasy back in the day?" Emma blinked. There is a mention in family archive records that an ancestor of ours was famous for his ability to get good whiskey, even when it was outlawed. He claimed he just had a good cellar from before when it was legal, but his neighbors didn't believe it. Probably because they helped transport it. Jobs were hard to come by in those days, Emma noted. I imagine people took what work they could get, even if that meant the illegal transport of liquor. Besides, it's not like it was a popular law with broad support. True enough. And at least that ancestor of ours had the sense to share the wealth with the town. Anyway, given the temperament of those times, I'm guessing this house saw a fair amount of violence. She drew a breath and let it out in a quick sigh. I'm told spirits generally don't bear the marks of whatever killed them, and that's been my experience up till now, but that woman has a bullet hole over her left breast. Jessie paused, then added dryly, I find that unnerving and I'd rather not look at it. Which is why you're going out again? Well, that and the practical need to look at the rest of the properties on this list Trent gave me and decide if I want to keep any of it. My reasonable excuse for wandering around, remember? Penny had the cook pack a lunch for me in case I'm out the rest of the day. She lifted the lightweight backpack at her feet and shrugged into it. You're going alone? Sure, it's a nice day for a hike, and none of this property is all that far from town. And since the houses are farther apart and we can't claim a war battlefield in this area, I'm not quite as likely to encounter more distracting spirits while I ramble around. Frowning again, Emma said, This psychic stuff really is bothering you, isn't it? I thought working for Haven had helped. So did I. Maybe you should call them, tell them what's going on. I've reported in. Jessie kept her voice casual. But we learn to control this stuff by being exposed to it, so maybe it's a good thing that Barren Hollow is so haunted. Anyway, Maggie told me to concentrate on what I came here to do, and that's settle with the past. You said you talked to Victor. Yeah, nice and civilized. She hadn't confided in Emma about the flash of memories that meeting had triggered, and didn't intend to. Not at least until she could clearly recall what had happened at that particular party. She wasn't about to leave Emma here in what should be her safe home, with the certain knowledge that 3 or 4 men she quite likely knew had brutalized her sister 15 years before, especially not when she couldn't be sure just who had been in that room. Jessie, I'm okay, Emma, just jumpy today. And a long walk sounds like a good idea. Just be careful, will you, please? Jessie looked at her curiously. Now you're sounding as jumpy as I feel. Any special reason? No reason. Just there are a lot of tourists in town, a lot of strangers. I'll be fine. See you later, probably by supper time. Emma watched her sister walk out of Rayburn House and bit back a sigh. They were still strangers, or as good as. Jessie was restless inside the house, quick to leave on her own to ramble around elsewhere, and she never had much to say when she came back. On top of which, Emma was positive she was having nightmares. She'd nearly confided her own nightmares more than once, but the timing had never seemed right. Besides which, she hadn't had a nightmare since before Jessie had come home, and had already half convinced herself that it was just as the doctor had said, her recovering brain reliving a traumatic event. Which was why she'd been so caught off guard when Jessie had asked her about recent murders. I should have talked to her about the nightmares then, but she had let that moment pass because the nightmares had seemed so insignificant, just dreams, and with a logical explanation for them, her accident. How could they be anything else? He had enjoyed tracking her. He knew the forest, the mountain trails like the back of his hand, so it was a simple thing to shadow her, to move parallel to the trail she followed. He didn't need a trail. All late Sunday afternoon he had shadowed her, staying far away so as to not attract her notice. When he judged there was enough distance between her and the hikers and trail riders who had chosen a different trail, he moved closer, still easily able to blend with the forest. He was close when she made camp for the night, and though he toyed with the idea of taking her then, he decided to wait a bit longer to draw out the anticipation he felt. He hadn't been able to resist coming back up here hours later just to watch her sleep. His June rose. She didn't know he was there. Of course, they seldom did, unless he wanted them to. A methodical man, he went over it in his mind, the plan for Monday. It would be a busy day for him, so he'd have to catch his prey in the late morning, not too late. Then take her to his trap and leave her there to be enjoyed later on. She was actually making it easier for him since she was hiking in the right direction. When he caught her, he wouldn't be very far from his trap, not very far at all. Smiling, he drifted away from her campsite, leaving her to peaceful dreams he knew would be her last. He was back very early on Monday, pleased to find her already up and about as well. She had clearly already had her breakfast and was now briskly packing up her little camp in preparation to move on. Good. That was good. He had a busy day ahead with appointments elsewhere and couldn't afford to spend too much time shadowing her today. Not too much time, just enough to save her. It annoyed him when she stopped suddenly, frowning as she gazed around her, and yet he was also aware of a thrill of excitement. She might not know it consciously, but some animal instinct was warning her that she was in danger. Good. He saw the gun she removed from her backpack, coolly calculating how close he would have to be to surprise her, to make sure she never got the chance to fire that gun or use the pepper spray. Close. Unless that was she froze in the moment. She didn't look the type to freeze. Good. Worthy prey. He waited until she walked on, then shadowed her again, his mind racing ahead, following the topography of the mountainside. There was a place he knew, farther along, a place where he could get close without her seeing him. A place where the distance between them would be, he judged, just close enough. He wanted the struggle, hungered for it, but he didn't want to give her a chance to get off a shot. A gunshot in these woods could easily go unnoticed. He knew only too well how many hikers and campers carried a rifle for protection. But the sound of a handgun was different, and he couldn't take the chance of the wrong person hearing and noticing that difference. He had to get his hands on her quickly. Aware of his heart beating faster, of adrenaline rushing through his entire body, He quickened his silent steps, moving faster so as to get ahead of her and get in position. Jessie had a rough map of the area she planned to explore. Trent had sketched it out for her, basing it on the land surveys in his office. Some of it she found vaguely familiar, experiencing a few flashes of memory that were blessedly uncomplicated. Childhood stuff. Walking with friends, swimming in a broad creek in the heat of summer, picking berries. Pleasant memories. But gradually, despite the bright summer day, she found herself shifting her pack as though the light weight was uncomfortable. Nervously tucking a strand of hair behind one ear, looking around her in a different way. That was when she recognized her own skin-crawling uneasiness. Someone walking over my grave. Now, there was a disturbing thought, and the sensation wouldn't go away. If anything, it got stronger as she walked. Jessie stopped, looking around to orient herself. The land she'd set out to explore lay at the base of the mountains in one of the many small valleys, some would say mere ravines, that dotted the area. Though she hadn't consciously chosen to do so, she realized she was following, through sparse trees, something a little more than a trail. It was a road. Not much of a road to be sure, but a road nevertheless, where cars had traveled in the not-too-recent past. Jessie stood there for a minute or so, her hands gripping the straps of her lightweight backpack. Gripping and easing, in a rhythm she recognized as a poor outlet for tension. She frowned down at the two faint ruts with grass and weeds growing between them. It wasn't, she thought, an old road now no longer used and being rapidly reclaimed by nature. It was a road that was used sporadically. Not exactly an uncommon thing in the area, between teenagers looking for places to park and other teenagers learning to drive, and old roads that simply no longer led to any place of interest. Frowning, Jessie took another step and felt the tingly unease increase. She could have sworn she caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of one eye, but when she turned her head, there was nothing unusual to be seen. Maybe just her nerves. Except that it happened at least 3 times, and by then what she was feeling was that she was definitely not alone out here. It was strange and unsettling, and though training told her to open herself up to whatever energy it was she was feeling, a deeper instinct told her not to. It was bad. Whatever it was bad. Wherever it lay, whatever lay at the end of it, this road was something to fear, something she feared. Jessie didn't remember the road, but her memories of many things about Barren Hollow were still fuzzy. Still, as she forced herself to walk on, the cold unease grew stronger, colder. And there was something creepily familiar about it. She knew this somehow. Knew this feeling, where it came from, and even what it meant. It was her mind trying to shy away, and she fought to stay focused. This feeling, this coldness, this awareness of evil. It was familiar because it was in her dreams. It was the way she felt when she woke, unable to remember anything except this horrible feeling of having looked at evil right in the face. It was broad daylight on a warm summer day, and Jessie's skin was cold and clammy. The sun beat down on her, yet she was shivering. There was no sign of anything amiss, and yet she wanted to turn and hurry back the way she'd come. That compulsion was so strong, finally, that she did stop with a jerk and turn and nearly jumped out of her skin. You can't run away from this. It was the same anxious-faced female spirit who had spoken to Jessie in town. the only one so far who had spoken to her. Why the hell not? Jessie heard herself demand, hating the spooked sound of her own voice. Everything happens for a reason, you know that. You came back here for this? I came back here to settle with the past. Yes, you did. Jessie shook her head. Nothing happened to me way out here, that much I'm sure of. What happened to me was... it was in town, a house in town. That was his start, his first. But he was younger then, and even if he'd been ready, he didn't dare kill. Not a local girl, someone easily connected to him. He was smarter than that. Even then, he was smarter than that. And he was always in control, always had his monster on a leash. If she had believed she had felt cold before, that was nothing compared to how Jessie felt when she heard those words. Through dry lips, she heard herself say something she hadn't been sure of until this moment. How am I supposed to find out who he is? How, when I don't remember who was even in that room? There were 4 of them that night, that last party, at least 4 of them. Which one? You can't turn back now. Follow the road. Follow your instincts. Stop him, Jessie. The spirit vanished there one instant and gone the next. Which one of them became a killer? How can I single out one when I can't remember who any of them were? For what seemed a very long time, Jessie stood there, staring at where the spirit had stood. More experienced mediums had told her about the spirit world's often enigmatic help for the living. For whatever reason, whatever universal rules dictated, direct questions were seldom answered, and the information that was offered too often sounded like riddles. But this... Jessie shrugged out of her backpack and dug into it for her cell phone. It was dead despite being wrapped in the protective casing developed by the FBI Special Crimes Unit. Psychics tended to have strong electromagnetic energy, and that energy tended to play havoc with electronics, especially those worn close to or on the body, like cell phones and wristwatches. The casing was usually effective, at least to a point, but Jessie had forgotten to charge her phone the night before, so what energy it held had been even more easily depleted than normal. Damn it to hell. Slowly she replaced the phone in her backpack, her panicked urge to call for help slowly fading. What was wrong with her? She was a trained investigator and experienced, and this was just the sort of situation she was expected to know how to handle. Spirits, and possibly murderers, but never before in her own. The question was she supposed to handle this on her own, investigate on her own because the spirit was right? Had the horrible experience in her past truly been the beginning of something even more horrific involving other women? Was it somehow her fault, her responsibility? Would things have been different if she'd been stronger that night? If she hadn't drunk so much or had been able to put up a fight? If she had reported it, had told someone? Was there innocent blood on her soul? Everything in Jessie cringed from that thought, but it had to be faced, because the universe was about balance. That was another thing she'd learned, and if her own weakness had been some kind of trigger, some catalyst for a killer, then maybe she was meant to stop him here and now. Maybe the dead phone was as much a sign as the spirit had been. Maybe it was intended to show her that she had to do this alone. Some things have to happen just the way they happen. Their mantra, both Haven and the Special Crimes Unit. Jessie had joined Haven with no belief in destiny and fate, but she'd had a total change of mind and heart within the first months in what had become her new life. Destiny existed, fate existed, and some things had to happen just the way they happened. "Okay," she said aloud. "Okay." She drew a deep breath and swung the backpack over one shoulder and continued walking along the road, fighting to ignore the dread that grew stronger with every step.